me introduce our scholar for you this evening and our presenter. In November of 1956, the management of the Ritz Hotel in Paris convinced Ernest Hemingway to repossess two small steamer trunks that he had stored there back in March of 1928. The trunks contained forgotten remnants from his first years in Paris, including notebooks of material relating to his novel, The Sun Also Rises. Inspired, he has been working on what he calls the Paris sketches in Cuba, in Idaho, in Spain, and in Paris from 1957 until today in 1959. Please welcome Ernest Hemingway.
When you go to war as a boy, you have a great illusion of immortality. Other people get killed, not you. And then, when you're badly wounded the first time, you lose that illusion. And you know it can happen to you. After being severely wounded 2 weeks before my 19th birthday in Italy in 1918, I had a bad time. Until I figured out that nothing could happen to me that hadn't happened to all men before me. Whatever I had to do, men had always done, and the best thing was not to worry about it. I got hit with a Minenwerfer lobbed in by an Austrian trench mortar. They filled those Minenwerfers with the damnedest collection of crap you ever saw. Nuts, bolts, nails, screws, spikes, metal scrap. And when they blew, you caught whatever you were in the way of. The doctors took 227 pieces of steel out of my leg. I was lucky. 3 Italians with me had their legs blown off. They said that I carried one of those Italians back to the trench. But when I think about that leg, I doubt that I did. But you shock out, and whatever they tell you, you think you remember. What happened to my character, Frederick Henry, in A Farewell to Arms, is pretty much what happened to me. We were eating in a dugout, and there was a cough, a noise like a railway engine starting, and then an explosion that shook the earth. Through the other noise, I heard a cough. Then came the ch-ch-ch-ch, and then there was a flash, like a blast furnace door swung open, and a roar that started white and went red and on bodily in the wind. I tried to breathe, but my breath would not come out. And I felt myself rush bodily out of myself and out and out and out and all the way bodily in the wind. I went out swiftly, all of myself. And I knew I was dead. And that it had been a mistake to think that you just die. And then I floated. And instead of going on, I felt myself sliding back. I breathed, and I was back. The ground was torn up, and in front of my head there was a splintered beam of wood. In the jolt of my head, I heard somebody crying. I thought I heard somebody screaming. I sat up straight, and as I did so, something inside my head moved like the weights on a doll's eyes, and it hit me inside, in back of my eyeballs. My legs felt warm and wet, and my shoes were wet and warm inside. I knew that I was hit, and I leaned over and put my hand on my knee. My knee wasn't there. My hand went in, and my knee was down on my shin. I wiped my hand on my shirt and looked at my leg and was very afraid. "Oh God," I said, "get me out of here." Everything that happened to me in Italy went into that book, one way or another. My nurse in Italy was my character, Catherine Barkley. You invent fiction, but what you invented out of is what counts. True fiction must come from everything that you've ever seen, ever known, ever felt, ever learned. What Frederick Henry felt when Catherine Barkley let down her hair and slipped into his hospital bed was invented from that nurse. Not copied, invented. The real nurse in Italy was a Red Cross nurse named Agnes von Kurowski. She was beautiful. We had a wonderful love affair in the summer and fall of 1918. But she never had a cesarean, nor was pregnant, like Catherine Barkley. Who had the cesarean was my second wife, Pauline. Happened while I was writing on Farewell in Kansas City. So that was part of Catherine. And my first wife, Hadley, was part of Catherine. But the Red Cross nurse was most of Catherine, plus some things that were of no woman I'd ever known. I've always found being in a hospital rather romantic. I was in a hospital in London in May of 1944. It was actually just 2 days after I met my current wife, and just a few weeks before I was at the landing at D-Day as a journalist. But in the auto accident that I had in London, I slammed into the windshield. And when I came out of the ether in the hospital, the first person that I saw was a nurse standing at the foot of the bed. She was a very plain, old-fashioned nurse. But I was so glad to be back among the conscious that I pulled her arm to my lips and kissed her on the elbow. "Oh, Mr. Hemingway," she exclaimed. "That's the only romantic thing that's ever happened to me." A couple of weeks later, when I was being discharged, she came back to my room, shy and embarrassed, and asked, would I do it again? I did. Same elbow. After the war, I was living in Paris and doing newspaper work. If you have ever lived in Paris as a young man, then wherever you go for the rest of your life, it stays with you. For Paris, Paris is a movable feast. In the basement of a building in Paris was the best nightclub that ever was, Le Jockey. Best drinks, best orchestra, wonderful clientele, world's most beautiful women. Was in there one night when the place was set on fire by the most sensational woman anyone had ever seen or ever will. Tall, coffee skin, ebony eyes, legs of paradise, and a smile to end all smiles. It was a hot night. She was wearing a coat of black fur. She turned her eyes to me. She was dancing with the big British gunner subaltern who brought her. And those eyes caught me and turned me into a hypnotic. I tried to cut in, but the subaltern tried to shoulder me out, but she slid off him and onto me. I introduced myself and asked her name. Josephine Baker, she said. We danced nonstop all night. She never took off that fur coat. When the joint closed, she finally told me she had nothing on underneath. We went to her place and we talked for hours, commiserating about what it's like to be in love with two people at the same time. It was when I was being forced to decide between Hadley and Pauline. Hadley had given me an ultimatum. She said I had to choose between them, and she gave me 100 days, during which, if I didn't see Pauline, and at the end of that time I chose her, Hadley would give me a divorce. Well, that's another story. During this time, I was writing stories, but nobody was buying them at home in America. I knew the stories were good, and that somebody would finally publish them back home. When I stopped doing newspaper work, I was sure the stories were going to get published. But everything that I sent out came back. Well, except one. The story called My Old Man was taken by the Best Short Stories book. It was one of only 2 stories I had left when everything I had written was stolen in Hadley's suitcase that time at the Gare de Lyon train station, when she was bringing the manuscripts down to me to Lausanne as a surprise so that I could work on them while we were on holiday in the mountains. She had put all my manuscripts, all the originals, all the typescripts, all the carbons in folders, except 2. My Old Man was in the mail, and there was another story somewhere in a drawer. I had never seen anyone so hurt by a thing other than death or unbearable suffering, except Hadley, when she tried to tell me about the things being gone. She had cried and couldn't bring herself to tell me. I told her that no matter what the dreadful thing was that had happened, that it couldn't be that bad, and that whatever it was, it would be all right. We would work it out. And then she told me. It was probably good to lose the early work, I said. And I fed her all the stuff that you feed the troops. But I missed those stories as if they were a combination of my house and my job, my only gun, my small savings, and my wife. I said I was going to start writing stories again. And as I said it, only trying to lie so that Hadley wouldn't feel so badly, I realized it was the truth. I remember the first story I was able to write after losing everything. It was a very simple story called Out of Season. And I had omitted the real end of it, which was that the old man hanged himself. Now, I had omitted this on my new theory that you could omit anything as long as you knew that you omitted. The reader, if the writer is writing truly enough, will have a feeling of those things as strongly as if the writer stated them. The dignity of motion of an iceberg is due to only 1/8 of it being above the water. The omitted part would strengthen the story and make the reader feel something more than they understood. Well, they certainly weren't understanding my stories so far. There was no doubt about that. There certainly no demand for them. But they would understand them the same way they always do in painting. All it takes is time, and all it needs is confidence. It is so damn hard to write well. There's so many tricks. Oh, it's easy to write if you use the tricks. Everybody uses them. James Joyce invented hundreds of new ones. Just because they were new didn't make them good. They would all turn to cliches. I wanted to write the way Cézanne painted. Cézanne started with the tricks, and then he broke the whole thing down and he built the real thing. It was hell to do. He was the greatest for always. I wanted to write about country so that it would be there, the way Cézanne had done it in painting. You had to do it so that the reader didn't remember the words, but actually had the country. It was hard, but to do it, you had to see the country all complete, the whole